to this live video discussion. The name of today's session, hosted by Medici, Oxford Cyber Futures Program, and ESME, is Cyber Vulnerabilities during COVID-19 and actions to be taken. Said differently, cybersecurity during the COVID-19-led crisis, right? Now, let me just give you a quick background, and then I will sort of, start the discussion with more knowledgeable people here. As we know, during this pandemic, we have seen an array of cybersecurity challenges, and some of these issues may persist even as countries are reopening and shutting down lockdowns. What we are also seeing is an increased sophistication in terms of cyber attacks and increased need for better cybersecurity. Now, I personally have always felt that this is such an important area which is neglected sometimes at CEO board level. And my classic sort of number-driven sort of argument against this is that we spend about $128 billion annually on cybersecurity globally, and this is to sort of tackle about $6 trillion of cyber-related exposures and losses. Seems like an imbalance, and a classic example of that is today, just as we were starting this, I read the news that Honda had to actually halt its production today because of a cyber attack, and it is unfortunate, but I think today we are going to discuss, more about this. Now, with every possible type of attack happening today, especially, as we are doing things more digitally, and so there are all sorts of new attacks growing. For example, identity spoofing, phishing, Trojan attacks, other security breaches. I think this is a very, very, important topic and a very opportune time to discuss this because some of these issues may go beyond the lockdown. And obviously, we want to discuss about what this means for financial services and what's the implication for fintech companies. Now, in order to discuss this important and less understood field, I have some senior experts and practitioners. I have Andy, Johan, and David. I will introduce them shortly. The way that I will kind of sort of cruise through this is that I will start with talking about the problem statements, and rather I would ask the experts to talk about their views on what is broken and what are the issues. Then we will discuss about various solutions that their firms provide and other solutions which are out there in the market. And then we'll finally discuss about the future outlook and what else can be expected and what are the other opportunities, right? So this is kind of what I'll follow. Maybe I'll start with David. David, you are recognized as a financial innovation expert. You are driving the Oxford Cyber Futures Program. You have written multiple books on cybersecurity and fintech. I have been privileged to know you since you were doing the MIT fintech course, which was hugely successful, and now you're doing with the University of Oxford. I want to ask you, like, what are you seeing in terms of trends? Especially given this pandemic, is the cyber risk increasing? And what's your take on how big is this problem?
Great. Thank you, Amit, and good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world, to our participants. So there are a number of trends that we're tracking right now under COVID, and I'll summarize them by saying no one is safe, but we can make ourselves safer. So the three major trends that we're looking at right now are around remote work, card not present and payment transactions, and disrupted behavior. So let me kind of break those down one at a time. But I will say that in all these instances, there are a few things that organizations and individuals can do that can dramatically improve cybersecurity. And I think we'll talk about that a little later today. So first of all, with respect to remote work, we've gone from a large percentage of the workforce being inside protected corporate environments to suddenly being massively distributed. And people are using home networks, insecure environments, And so that's creating a lot of cyber vulnerabilities that didn't exist before. Another kind of offshoot of this is the rise of IoT cyber insecurity. So you have someone who's working from home in their living room or in their dining room, and they've got an IoT device, a connected device, whether it's an Amazon Alexa or it's a smart television set or it's a baby monitor. And a lot of these devices were not built with strong security in mind. And so you create the potential for, in an extreme example, hackers listening in on sensitive phone calls of targeted executives. So it's a massively insecure environment, and people need to get sensitized to this dramatic shift in the kinds of attack surfaces that hackers can pursue. All right, so that's remote work. That's one. Second one, card not present transaction. So card not present transaction can sometimes make up 80% or more of all credit card fraud just in normal times. Card not present fraud rates are 4 times those of chip and pin or card swipe or EMV, you know, where you physically have the card and you're presenting it to someone. And so we've had a dramatic shift into e-commerce as a result of all of the COVID-related lockdowns. And so e-commerce is up last month, I think it was 57% year over year. And with that, we create kind of a massive explosion of more card not present fraud. So increased volume in e-commerce creates higher fraud rates, which become, you know, another challenge, particularly for merchants and issuer banks to deal with, as well as the payment companies themselves. And finally, and this point kind of interplays with the other 2 points, our behavior is disrupted, right? We've gone from predictable behavior patterns, and just to put a number on it, the average person is, you know, about 94% of their behavior repeats in ordinary circumstances of, you know, kind of going to work and going to the same coffee shop at about the same time of day and going to the same sandwich or lunch places in a sort of repeatable pattern. And so on the one hand, for fraud modeling, that makes it easier to detect if there are some novel or outlier events that could indicate card fraud. That all those machine learning models get disrupted when people's behavior gets disrupted. So that's a challenge if you're an issuer bank, or if you're a card network, or a payment processor, or another kind of participant in the financial ecosystem dealing with payments. But the other issue is more subtle and more pervasive, which is, you know, when you're in a settled and comfortable pattern of behavior, you can notice when odd things happen, like you get a strange email from someone that you wouldn't normally get an email from, and you might not click on that link that they sent you. What hackers have found, and this has been accompanied by a significant increase in cyber attacks pursuing this, is that phishing is a lot more productive in the current environment, because people's patterns of behavior are disrupted, they're off their guard, they're anxious, and so their guard is down, basically. And so more malware attacks are occurring, more phishing attacks are occurring. So that's something that we're seeing in the current trends under COVID, which are kind of riding along some larger long-term trends.
Right. Anything specific to fintech and financial services when we kind of, you know, define the issues in terms of cyber risk? David?
Yeah, well, you know, Willie Sutton, an American bank robber, famously said, "Why rob banks?" When someone asked him, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. And so companies involved in fintech and financial services represent high value targets for hackers. And unfortunately, many fintechs lack the resources or knowledge to be able to have dedicated security professionals and rigorous SOC 2 compliant or comparable cybersecurity procedures. And so they are soft targets and attractive targets at the same time. And so I think greater cyber literacy would help with that. But it's a major issue. I mean, I think we have an insecure financial system because, you know, we either lock everything up and then it's unusable, or we open everything up and it's vulnerable. People need to find a third way that allows for usability, but also provides better cyber protection.
Right, right. So I want to bring Johan Gerber into the discussion. He's the Executive Vice President of Security and Cyber Innovation at MasterCard. And at MasterCard, he looks at product strategies for cybersecurity, financial crime, consumers, online credential management, and dispute resolution, and also works with some of the portfolio companies. Johan, my question to you is that as we are doing more things online, and as a lot of transactions are moving from card present to card not present, a massive shift from sort of retail to e-commerce. What do you think are some of the trends as we try to define the problem in terms of cyber risk, and what are the issues that you are seeing in payments?
First of all, thank you for inviting us to participate in this conversation today. This stuff is fascinating, and the work that you and your team are doing is so important, especially in the sector of startups and businesses and fintech and so forth. This is what you just described is, and David did a great job of putting out a lot of this out there. We see this massive shift to e-commerce. I mean, that's very, very clear as a result of the pandemic. This is an acceleration into electronic commerce. And that means basically two big trends for us. First of all, there's this massive shift of consumers who in the past, preferred to go to the store in person. They like to go shopping. They would go there on whenever they needed to. But all of a sudden, there's a whole segment of consumers who are now forced to participate in this online world. And for years, the industry have worked to educate consumers. Do not click on that wrong link. Do not give your PIN out when somebody asks you. A lot of that consumer education. Now we have a whole new generation, new segment of consumers entering into this space, which we need to educate, and those vulnerabilities are there. And to David's point, the cyber criminals are just sitting there waiting to seize this opportunity, and they're actively working on. So we can see this massive shift or increase in phishing attacks, all sorts of attacks targeting consumers in various ways. Some of them targeted towards e-commerce, some of them, a lot of it going after stimulus money as well. We've seen that as a big part of the problem as well, where people are out of a job, they get the stimulus check for some, and then the criminals are trying to find their way to corrupt and coerce these consumers into giving up that financial gain that they got. That's one area. The other area is in order to fuel this shift into commerce, we see the surge in new businesses entering the space, which is brilliant. I mean, there's a whole new generation of startups, new companies that are being formed amidst this pandemic, which is brilliant for the economy, which, I think we're going to see so much innovation coming out of this. But the problem is a lot of those companies are running so fast in order to get into the space that they are vulnerable, and the stats that I've seen the other days, almost 2/3 of any startup new company are being attacked by cyber criminals. Now, if some portion of that is successful, my biggest fear is how many of the next, Fortune 500 company got killed before they even got out of the starting blocks. So those are some of the big things that we worry about. So there's a consumer component, there's a whole new businesses area that's rising, which is all brilliant for us. But if we don't do this right, we will not see the full benefit to the economy, to the consumer, and so forth. So those are some of the big trends that we are seeing, and that's keeping me up in particular at night.
Thanks, Johan. I also want to bring in, Andrew Jackwith. Andy is the Chief Information Security Officer of Complex. He's responsible for protecting company information assets, managing enterprise risks, and is also the GM of Cyber Business Unit. Now, Andy also has worked at large banks such as JP Morgan, where he was responsible for global operational risk and informational risk. And before that, he also worked at Goldman Sachs. Andy, basically start with, kind of explaining what Complex does, for people who may not know Complex. And I also want to understand from you that you have held senior cyber risk roles at large banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. So if you were there, hypothetically, how would you deal with a crisis like this? How would you prepare, and how would you deal with something like this? And what would be some of the major considerations that you would?
Great. Thanks, Amit, for having me. By the way, really nice to be with everybody. Got a great panel. Appreciate everybody's work on this very important topic. So I held senior MD roles at Goldman and JP Morgan in the past, and we've used some of that culture to bring into the product set that we provide at Complex. So I'll provide not more than 20 seconds on Complex before tackling the cyber issues here. At Complex, we believe cyber risk is a data-driven discipline, and that it can be made better with better access to data and a more thoughtful approach to balancing risks based on quantitative approaches. So we solve some pretty challenging problems in cyber, specifically around safeguarding the integrity and functioning of the authentication and authorization, which are two linchpins of some of the key cyber problems that we've seen with the top of the line, top of the fold cyber breaches that we've seen. Most of these are designed to exploit authentication systems and to take advantage of loose authorization controls. So we think that we're fundamentally in the catastrophic breach prevention business, the kind of stuff that be in the headlines, not your run-of-the-mill cyber stuff. So we have a deeply vested interest in using data to make those decisions better. But specific to your question around what would you do in a large globally distributed enterprise, and certainly I'm biased by banking experience, but I think of a couple things. I think first off is the people, right? When you're looking at a global health crisis like COVID, your thoughts clearly go out to your workforce. Are they safe, right? Are they observing good habits? The corporation has a role to play in that. Part of that also relates to security. So not only are they safe, they've got a roof over their heads. They're staying healthy, but also that they've got the logical perimeter that you provide within the corporation is extended to their home office. One of our clients recently said, "I've got a new security problem. I've got 10,000 home offices that is now my new perimeter." And I thought that was a great way of putting it, because you don't have the benefit of some of these next generation firewalls, some of the complex filtering that you can do, some of the core protections that you have don't apply to somebody's home laptop that is, you hope, sitting behind some kind of decent router. But of course, we all know that these things can be compromised. David set up the Internet of Things discussion on this pretty well, right? So you've got a whole new set of concerns, and there's fundamentally, most employees are fundamentally less safe when they're in their home office than when they're at home. Just other kind of quick topics that I think about. Certainly in large companies, you're looking at the resilience of the business. So the business functions, can they continue to work as they're supposed to? Can you continue to make money, serve customers, and the like? Most of large organizations have a set of business critical applications that simply have to work in order to allow their business to function as normal. And so you look at that, right? Business resilience writ large is a thing in a lot of the big companies these days. And that's expressed in a lot of different ways. Certainly the Bank of England did a very influential paper a couple years ago. The Fed has been working at this in the US. But understanding how your business continues to function is the second part. And I will say, in this crisis, many corporations that had previously embraced teleworking, that had strong VDI infrastructure, for example, that had existing relationships with some of the video conferencing providers, have done pretty well. My own company, for example, has not really missed anything in the shift to homework, and I think that's true with a lot of large organizations that have been serious about business resilience for years. I think just the last two kind of topics here briefly, the financial impact. Most certainly in an institution, if you're of significant size, you're expected to do capital modeling. You're looking at a range of scenarios that would stress the bank, typically with economic considerations, but often cyber. So, one of the places that I formerly worked incorporated cyber into their CCAR capital set-asides, right? Which is to say, you'd model adverse cyber scenarios. You'd then work that through a series of exercises, models, basically, to determine, what's the 99th percentile outcome. What does that mean money-wise, right? How much money do I have to put aside on my balance sheet? And so, the scenarios, the capital, and the results of that are all part of that. And this exercise now with COVID is a great opportunity to recalibrate some of those models, to take a look at how well they've held up. And then the last, as I've alluded to, there's a cyber dimension to this, right? There are some specifics around extending the workforce in a virtual way that make it imperative for companies to be thinking differently about cyber in a global health crisis like that. So that's how I'd characterize it: people, apps, financial impact, and the cyber dimension.
Great. I think all three of you have really sort of, defined the problem and the issues from various perspectives. I think some of these new problems also require new solutions. And with the rapid rise in credit card, identity fraud, potential new attack vectors that you guys have explained, we need to sort of, think about solutions. And that is a good segue into the next section, where I want to ask each one of you that what are the solutions, what are the products and services that your firms offer. So maybe I can start with Johan, and especially Johan, since you work at MasterCard and you're dealing with financial institutions. What are the things that financial institutions should do to protect themselves in the current environment, and what are the sort of the solutions that MasterCard offers?
Yeah, no. I mean, this is such an important question right now, and it's something that we spend a lot of time on. And I'm not sure we have all the questions, but at the baseline is make sure that you're informed. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here for some of the work that David and his team does with Cyber Futures. Get educated. Make sure you understand what's going on, and at least you can make intelligent decisions and assessments when it comes to these problems around cyber. I speak to so many executives where the moment you start speaking cyber, all they hear is risk framework, PCI, some gobbledygook that nobody understands or wants to hear about, and they shut down. And I think there's a need for us to be educated a little bit differently. I know David's going to probably speak about it a little bit more, but it's so important. The other piece that is really concerning is, and everybody touched on this, is this very complex cyber ecosystem within which we live right now. Nothing is disconnected on its own anymore. Not payments, not my home office, not my IoT and baby monitor, all these things that we say, they all connect to the same Wi-Fi networks or other networks. So in the end, we have a very complex cyber ecosystem. And then you throw into the mix that when we look at financial institutions, and frankly, any business for that matter, have third-party providers. So this whole notion of third-party risk, those are some of the big areas where we were thinking we need to come up with solutions. Identity theft, like you mentioned. So those are some of the areas where we are working hard on getting solutions. So you need to get educated, and we offer a number of solutions in that area. For instance, MasterCard did an acquisition of a company called Risk Recon, where our aim is to help unpack the complexities of this very sophisticated ecosystem within which we operate. My business, if I'm a bank, I may be a merchant that does e-commerce business or any other business for that matter. I'm an insurance company, healthcare company, you name it. I have third-party providers that I rely on for services. They rely on third parties. So you've got this web of interconnected services. And what we're trying to do with a company like Risk Recon is to say, how do we assess the cyber posture of that entire ecosystem to understand what are the risks involved here, and then move from there on. So that is an important part, as well as identity theft. We have a couple of solutions around identity theft that are also important for us.
Right. And, similar question to you, David, how is sort of Oxford thinking about, addressing these issues? Obviously, I think somebody talked about the people, human resources issue. What, my question to you is, how is Oxford kind of thinking about these issues?
Sure. Well, and a couple of sort of framing statistics on that. On the one hand, more than 60% of cyber breaches are due to human error or action. And so we have lots of great technology, but if people misuse it or fail to use it, we create a breach anyway. So cyber literacy is incredibly important. In fact, so much so that according to one study, companies that invest in cyber literacy and cyber education are 200% better at dealing with cyber breaches than companies that don't. So this is an important dimension of kind of what we're thinking about when University of Oxford looks at cyber and how we can help play a role. And of course, there's also just the human capital gap. There are 2.8 million cybersecurity professionals in the world, and there are more than 4 million unfilled cyber positions. So there are more open cyber jobs than there are people currently holding cyber jobs. So there's a massive labor shortage. So this is how we're addressing this. Across the university, there's a university-wide cybersecurity initiative, which spans many different schools, departments, and disciplines, because cyber is a richly interdisciplinary topic. So we've brought together faculty from computer science and from engineering and from law and policy and the business school and other areas across Oxford to help address cyber. So a few ways we do that. One way is with research. So there are hundreds of researchers working on different dimensions of the cyber problem and potential cyber solutions. The second is on the technical side, we have a formal degree program, a Master's of Science in Software and System Security that's quite popular. We're recognized by GCHQ as an academic center of excellence. So government security professionals have recognized that we are putting together the right people against the right problems. And then in Said Business School, which is where I spend my time, we've created Oxford Cyber Futures, which is an entirely online program, which again draws on that richly interdisciplinary approach. So we have faculty from the business school, we have faculty from computer science, we have faculty from the Oxford Internet Institute, and we have over 24 guest experts from the real world of dealing with cyber, ranging from large organizations like MasterCard to innovative cutting-edge startup companies, as well as leaders in government, all of whom are providing insight into how the non-technical professional can deal with cyber. So particularly with Oxford Cyber Futures, we're trying to help sort of everybody else who the CISO is trying to work with, helping them improve their cyber readiness and see what potential cyber opportunities there are.
Right. So this is great. I also want to kind of highlight two things. One is that we have about 100 people who are sort of live on Zoom right now, and this is also being aired live on YouTube as well as Twitter and LinkedIn. So there are many more people who are joining us from there. And I have also started kind of getting questions in the feed, so I will take them up. I'll curate them. And in fact, my next question is to Andy, and I was going to ask something, and I think one of the participants actually also asked this question. So I'm just going to club both of them. So at Complex, I understand that you guys are sort of, you're basically using a very novel way of using artificial intelligence and machine learning for, insurance. And I think somebody also asked that how important is machine learning algorithms in detecting cyber incidents prevention? So let me club all of this and ask you, like, how are you using AI and machine learning and dealing with cyber risk and offering a cyber insurance solution?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. What we call machine learning is really a bag of techniques that have their roots in many different branches of mathematics, right? So probably the one that most people are familiar with involve using different kinds of regression techniques to detect trends, right? So for example, a regression analysis is what is the underpinnings of Amazon's recommendation engines, right? You liked this, therefore other people are likely to like these other things, and you can do this in a multidimensional way that allows you to find trends. Now, what we do in the cyberspace is we use a variety of techniques, including regression and others, to try and find patterns in the data. That's important for some of the analytic detections that you run that are looking for some of the key cyber breach indicators. So that's important. You did ask you also asked a little bit about insurance and how we do that and some of the work that we do there. So there's kind of two sides to how you apply this. The first is on, shall we say, the input side. Those are the cyber, looking for those cyber incidents, trying to use I'm going to say big data or AI, to use the popular press term for this, to try and find these unique circumstances. What you also, though, have to do on the other side, and this is where insurance comes into play, is you've got to model out what the expected losses are going to be based on a couple of factors, based on the history that you see, and that based on industry metrics. There are a lot of breach databases, for example, that are very informative. And there are many, many other indicators you can use as predictors, right? So you essentially throw that into a big blender is the non-mathematical way of describing it. And that allows you to make some inferences and to reason about the kinds of loss that you might be expecting. So for example, we build models that look at value at risk. We have other things that look at our CEO Jason calls it probability of ruin, meaning there's a 50% chance you're going to lose $1 million. There's a 40% chance you're going to lose $5 million. There's a 1% chance you're going to lose $1 billion, right? These are ways that many folks in senior positions they can understand those kinds of chances, and it gives them a better sense of what they're really up to. Now, all this is based on the quality of the inputs, right? So garbage in, garbage out also applies to machine learning and to AI and other kinds of models, right? So you've got to always work to make sure that you've got good data sources that allow you to create better quality models. And in cyber, it's hard because you've got what you'd call a black swan problem. You've got many of these highly catastrophic breaches that only happen once in a blue moon, right? And when they happen, they're awful. And so they're not quite like the run-of-the-mill stuff that are much easier to take care of. So it's all a challenging endeavor, but frankly, as we gain more collective experience, both as a vendor, but also working as an ecosystem, there are many companies that are doing good work in this area. We all know each other and are friends, and there's a good bit of collective learning that we're all doing. So a lot of people are licensing each other's data and using them to make better blended models and so forth. So I think as a sector, we're all getting a lot better at this. And frankly, it's a heck of a lot better than what it used to be, which is I feel great. I think my probability of I think my average loss is going to be $10. And it's very unlikely. These are the crystal ball expert sitting on the couch stuff is less attractive now that you've got more data sources. So thanks for the question. I hope that gave you a good answer of how we're thinking about this.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a whole stream of questions that is coming from the participants. And, I always kind of tend to pick up questions more from here because anyways, these are more smarter questions than what I'm asking, I think. So let me just pick up one question for each one of you here. I'll start with Johan. This gentleman, Adrian Emmer, who's asking, when cyber breaches result in massive financial loss for a bank or company, why are these losses generally not pursued and recovered, and or other sanctions not pursued?
Yeah, I actually think, as Paul, I can talk for what I see happening in MasterCard. I mean, that when these things happen, we actually work very, very closely with law enforcement around the world. In fact, we have a whole group of people that are specializing in working with law enforcement and how do we recover this money. And there are all sorts of vehicles for which that can happen, obviously using all the legal means to do that. But I actually do think that especially the large ones, we do that. And it's a big effort to say, how can we repatriate that funds back to its owners to get it back? And so that's definitely an important part of the equation. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is that there's also, the great thing about the time today is with all the technology that we have, there are great resources out there for folks. And for instance, one of the things that MasterCard is also doing is we're working with organizations like the Cyber Readiness Institute. We're working on an initiative with the Global Cyber Alliance, where there's just a ton of resources for businesses. There are free toolkits that can help you get going on cyber if you're a business, places where you can go and educate yourself, read yourself. So there are also, and I wanted to say that in my previous segment, but I got some background noise that I had to quickly shut down. But there are some brilliant resources out there today. A lot of the stuff is for free if people are just willing to go and look and dig a little bit for them. And if anybody wants to learn more, come and talk to us and we can be happy to kind of point you in the right direction. And a lot of the things that David will be talking about in Cyber Futures will also point to some of these resources as well.
Right. So Johan, I can assure you that you're going to get a lot of LinkedIn requests after the session and, asking you to share
Always
all
happy
these
with
resources.
those.
Yeah. Andy, question for you. There's a gentleman by the name Eric Bear who's saying, what do you think about the current rise of quantum computing? Cloud services would become a facilitation for authentication attacks and threats.
Great question. I'm probably the wrong crypto guy. I will say I used to work with one of the guys at Goldman who was the funder of one of the key quantum computing vendors. So I do know a little bit about what I hear over the shoulder, kind of at the board level on this stuff. What I will say is, quantum. There is a lot of discussion around what quantum computing can do. For example, the key factoring, right? The idea that you might be able to very rapidly crack cryptographic keys using quantum computers. From what I do know, and the last time I was talking to some of the folks, I was talking to the CEO of D-Wave, who's one of the vendor that I was referring to. These computers are pretty specialized, right? They're not general purpose computers. You couldn't write a Python script and execute them on them, just to be sort of a silly example. They're really looking at very specialized examples, and so. Quantum key cracking, I'm sure that is something that is of high interest to many of the agencies in the Five Eyes communities in particular. I think from what I know, it's not in the realm of feasibility, but I'm also not cleared. So I would say that this is an area of research, but I don't think there's any reason to panic yet. These aren't general purpose computers. They're very specialized, and I think we will see as we go.
I want to add to that, Amit, that, we've been looking at this obviously from a financial point of view very closely. And the way I'm thinking about this and explain this is, as you have attackers using this computer, you will also need to think that the way we do cryptography today will not be the same by then. So there's a whole new solutions that will use this new advanced forms of technology to improve what we know today as cryptography and keys and so forth. So the whole dimension will change. And, in fact, I can tell you that we've been working on this very hard already. And there's some really interesting technology and new IP coming out on those kind of things to make it safer.
Yeah. Johan, it's
so
a great
guys
point.
will be using the same tech as well to create better solutions as well.
It's a great point. There's a lot of sort of quantum, I'm going to call it anti-quantum, or just, how do you anticipating what might happen.
Quantum can redo, right?
Yes.
You're going to have just like in warfare, you went from cavalry charges to tanks. Both sides had tanks, and they were shooting at each other. So it is helpful to think of it in that paradigm, because you're constantly having to invest in improving your systems, because you have AI on the defense side. Suddenly, the attackers have AI. So you need better AI on the defense side. Quantum is going to be the same thing.
I agree.
Okay, David, there are a whole bunch of questions for you. So I'm going to, use my skills to sort of sum them up into one or two questions for you.
Sure.
Let me just ask them, together, and then you can answer them. So there is a question that, I'm in London in the lockdown. I've heard that there are courses where you can take them up, 3 months courses with a certain fee, and they give you a certificate as well. Is this true? Another person is asking, what paths do we need to follow in order to be well qualified in cybersecurity field? Somebody is asking very, interesting question. How can you learn such a lengthy and technical subject in a few months? And there's also a question for you, David, that US NACD have a specific cyber risk oversight certificate for directors. So is Oxford planning something specific for directors as well? So I think this is a whole range of questions on, from a training perspective.
Okay, I'll try and be brief. Let's see. So, there are lots of people who offer online certificate programs. There are very, very few online certificate programs from the very top universities in the world. And so we are the only online certificate program from University of Oxford in this area. But the other thing to bear in mind is, which certificate program are you talking about? So most cyber training that is offered, not all, but most, is geared towards technical professionals. And part of the gap that we are filling with Cyber Futures is creating something that's engaging and useful for the business professional who needs to improve their cyber competency, which is most business professionals, and possibly for the technical professional is thinking about business opportunities in cyber. So it's a different lens on it, right? So 43% of business executives think that their organization is cyber ready, and only about 24% of organizations are. It's a huge gap between perception and reality. We're trying to close that gap. The other issue is that people typically think about cyber in the realm of fear. You know, if you don't download this virus update or install VPN, your brain is going to melt and dribble out through your ears. We're looking at the realm of opportunity as well. So if you implement good cyber practice, here are the new business opportunities opening up for you, or here are the new profit opportunities opening up for you. So it's, again, a different perspective on cyber, and why we called it Oxford Cyber Futures. So that's important to bear in mind. There are a number of different paths in the world of cyber. So yes, there are the more traditional certified cybersecurity professional roles where you are implementing or creating technology for cyber, but increasingly there are other roles bridging between the world of technology and the world of business application. And we need those cyber professionals as well. So there are a number of different paths you can follow. You can get a degree, you can get a series of courses or training, and then there are professional certifications if you're trying to become a CISO or another senior cybersecurity professional. The question about just a few months and suddenly you're magically a cyber master, that just doesn't happen. There's no cheat code for cyber. What we provide is a broad-based introduction. It's a survey class. If you decide cyber is a profession you want to go into, you probably should get more significant cyber training, which would probably be a series of courses or programs or a degree program. So the master's degree from University of Oxford, for example, I believe it's either 5 or 6 classes. It's a full master's program. So that could take 1 to 2 years. There's no program in the world that could reasonably get you to become at Johan or Andy's level of expertise in 3 months. It's just not possible for the human brain to absorb knowledge that quickly. In terms of the NA, so I would be wary of someone promising you that you would be capable of stepping into a senior CISO job after only a few months. The NACD, they're keying into a major trend, which is last year about 40% of major corporate boards required cybersecurity reporting. This year, it's expected to be 100%. It's expected to be a major area of board focus. And so we're certainly aware of that. The Cyber Futures program would be for a highly informed board member, but more likely someone who's 1 or 2 levels down, if not 3 levels down from the board. But we are not yet able to talk in detail, but this fall, watch out for our announcements, because we expect to be able to communicate clearly something more for that board or CEO role.
I'm actually liking this one question. It's a classic first principles question that I have no experience at all in this field, but interested to get involved in cybersecurity. How realistic is it for me to get a job in this field after completing your course?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It depends on if you have other technical skills that can translate. If you have no background in technology and no background in business, you have an undergraduate degree and you take our course will give you the vocabulary and understanding. It's a program, not a course, I should say. Our program will give you an understanding that will let you figure out what other courses or programs you need to take in order to get a job in the field. But if you are a senior cryptography professional and have deep database and data security experience, but you're not a cyber professional, our course will probably give you some of the vocabulary and frameworks to be able to explain to a hiring manager why you would be a good person to bring onto their team. And I don't know, Johan or Andy, if you want to add to this point. You both are hiring managers, so you might have a perspective.
Yeah. I think just for us, I mean, we tend to look for people that are experienced in cyber. That's, we're a small team. We can't do a whole lot of on the job training, for lack of a better way of putting it. But that said, I will say, if you've been in a operational role in tech, oftentimes, depending on the problem area, it may translate really well. So I think that David's point about, for example, you've been working in databases, for example, there's probably a lot of things you've been doing that are security related as part of your job, and you can expand your conception of that a little bit and actually do quite well. So yeah, I would echo that. But it's hard to come in completely cold off the street.
I'm totally there with you.
Yeah,
you have to start somewhere. Yeah. But I'll tell you, the other reality is that we have a shortage of security experts. Well, there's just no question about that. So we are encouraging people to take that leap and to start, so don't feel threatened to say, look, I'll never get there. That's also not true. There are various types of roles that you can enter into and ways to work yourself into a more experienced security professional. So I would encourage you to speak to your employers, or, for instance, ourselves, we are doing courses with universities. It even comes in and train our staff after hours for people who want to further with their own education. So I think there are a lot of employers who's doing more and more to equip their workforce with this as well. And I think, if you have some base skills, I think those transferable skills, you're off to a great start.
And I will add that some employers, and one large employer in particular, is starting to put the fact that you took our program into people's human resources goals, into their annual goals and promotion goals. So employers are beginning to recognize that this is something valuable. Yeah,
for instance, we do that, David, and that's a great example of some of the stuff that we do as well. So there's definitely a career path and an education path. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to some of my own questions, and we have probably another 10, 12 minutes. So my next question is really about that, all the risk and the change that we are seeing, it brings a lot of opportunity. And there are, I'm sure there are areas within cybersecurity, cyber risk, where you expect a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship to come in. Are there any specific areas that you guys want to mention? Especially, this question is to Andy and David. Are there any promising startups or technologies that could be game changers within the financial services? And what are your thoughts?
I'll let Andy go first.
I'd modestly suggest ours is one of the game changers, of course, but I'm
that's
also
why you're in the program. But
as we say in the sports world, I'm also a homer. So clearly, I'm gonna say that. No, but to me, the most interesting parts of cyber right now are looking at. I am a big fan of data-driven security, and I tend to think that we're all going to be better off with that. I actually really like. I'll give a tip of the hat to the folks at Risk Recon and some of the other folks in that space, right? Just looking at the observable data that you can see publicly without being invasive has actually been massively influential in terms of driving awareness of third-party risk. And there's limits to what you can learn externally, but nonetheless, if your external internet presence isn't spotless, there's probably other things going on that it's hinting at that are actually quite indicative. So I think that's been a really nice area. The other part, just looking across the industry, there's been a lot of work spent on trying to increase the economic friction of attackers, right? So there's a whole category that's come up around deception. How can you create? How can you make it look like there are valuable targets, even though they're just not actually there? And your whole job is to catch the attackers. So it's kind of an evolution of what we used to call honeypots and honey nets and things like that. But ways of detecting bad actors without actually being harmed. I think this is a pretty interesting area of the product space. And and there's a lot of stuff that continues to just evolve in different ways, right? All the endpoint protections. It used to be antivirus. Now we're in EDR is kind of the new hotness, but fundamentally just hardening those endpoints. There's always a new level of escalation on the defense side. So it's great to see. There's 5,000 companies in cyber now. They're not all going to survive, but they're all doing interesting work and they're there for a reason.
And with the hundreds of billions being spent on cyber security, I think we're going to see more of those companies. So I'll answer, in a couple of ways. The area that I think is particularly interesting is there's been a trend towards data portability and data distribution. So we're going from having centralized data models to edge and highly distributed data models. This creates a different kind of threat profile and a different attack surface around cybersecurity. And so thinking about reinventing cybersecurity in the age of distributed data is, I think, a very interesting opportunity. So whether you're looking at it from the lens of what open banking means, or you're looking at it from the lens of all these blockchain companies that are creating distributed data profiles, or you're looking at it from the realm of COVID response, where lots and lots of very sensitive health data has suddenly become shared in a lot of different environments. I think there are both risks and opportunities around helping manage those kinds of different data profiles. So that's one thing. I will mention there are a couple of questions that flowed through the chat, and I'll just call them out in passing, which is around Cyber Futures program, which is just, who is it for, basically? It's for anyone who wants to learn about cyber and get a broad-based foundation, whether they are technical or business-oriented, but it is not a coding class. So if you're a technical analyst in some business area, but you want to understand cyber better, this is great. If you're a P&L manager who's running a business unit and you want to understand cyber better, it's also great for you. It's intended to be a foundational class. And so if you look at the syllabus, it has more information.
Amita, maybe I would just want to add one thing to what Andy said around, new technology and where we see some of the new future coming out. There's this whole notion that we are very involved in called collaborative AI. And how do we get AI to actually start sharing threat intelligence and operationalize that threat intelligence so that we can become more proactive in how do we veer off attacks and those kind of things. There are a lot of threat intelligence sharing initiatives around the globe, some of them driven by law enforcement and by all sorts of alliances. But we need to operationalize that data, get it into AI models. We need to also figure out a way, and I think we've done some work on this in the fraud space and now working on translating that into the cyberspace. How can I protect privacy and data nationalism, as we call it, so data can stay where they are, but AI has the ability to extract the most important points at an aggregated level and share the data, because we know, like with any of these things, if an attack starts in one place, it's not going to stay there. So once these things are detected, how do we very quickly update the rest of our systems and other systems? How do we find out who else has the same vulnerability of somebody that just got an attack, and how do we then prevent that? So that's an area that I think there's a great future on for new startup, new development, new innovation. That's actually very, very cool to see how AI can be used, and a mix of what I call it collaborative AI, really start having our various AI systems actually start talking to one another in some sort of a universal protocol or language type thing.
That's also a very good segue into our next section about future outlook. And my question to you, Johan, is that what are you thinking about next? As we start to sort of emerge from this immediate crisis, what are the top of the mind things that you have, and where do you think we are headed, as an industry?
I see a place where this digital connected expansion that we are seeing, the acceleration, how IoT is used in connection with just about every other part of our lives. I see a place where there's a convergence of cyber, AI, and what we call digital identities. Because in the end, cyber is and things like authentication actually goes hand in hand. And I've said this to anybody who's listened to me in the fraud space. There are two big questions that I think we face in a digital environment doing transactions. One is the person who they say they are, and is this device authorized to do what it's trying to do? Which is a big, big part of the future. If we're going to see more and more things happening online, those are the kind of areas where we're going to have to solve. And I see AI playing a major role in allowing us to do that. And just the distributed way of how we do data, that's a big, big thing that we have to solve. I also see an environment where foundational to the solution to these problems that we just described is privacy. And how do we do this in a distributed way where the data is not concentrated in one single place, but distributed, that we can protect people's privacy, where the consumer will have a little bit more control. The other piece that I see, so that's more on a corporate global level. The other area where I don't think we have seen enough and where I would like to see a little bit more is how do we protect the consumer? Because all of our corporates and people are doing a lot of work and spending billions of dollars on protecting our corporate assets. But often the most vulnerable point is that single employee or that single consumer out there who's got an access device that gets access to your systems. And I think that's another area where I think we will see a lot of innovation to come in the future.
The same question to you, David. We know that there's a human capital shortage in this sector. And, obviously the Oxford Cyber Futures course is kind of meant to deal with it. But what are your other sort of, observations, comments on, how to sort of deal with the situation going forward?
Well, so I saw one question come through the chat, which was something like, can we educate non-technical professionals about cybersecurity? And my answer to that is we have to. So mindset shift is required to bring better cybersecurity into practice. And so that's something we spend a lot of time on. But in terms of areas and trends, I mean, I think there are some interesting derivatives of cybersecurity, and we heard Johan allude to them around digital identity. Basically, we access control and authentication are kind of frontline cybersecurity dimensions. And our current systems for identifying people are really terrible. Like username and password is an awful, awful way to sort of get people into a system. And so we need better ways of knowing who people are and understanding that someone is authorized to do certain things. And so that requires not only new technology, but people willing to adopt new technology. And so if I may, part of our mission in Oxford Cyber Futures is to try to help people acquire not just the vocabulary and the understanding of the technology, but also the tools to be able to affect that behavior change or that mindset shift that we need. And we're trying to do it in ways that are a lot more interesting than conventional digital learning. So we've radically redesigned what it's like to go through an online class and made it a lot more engaging. We've used a lot of cognitive neuroscience to try and make it more interesting, and even incorporated a dynamic cyber attack simulation where on a timed exercise, you and a team are dealing with a cyber incursion, simulated cyber incursion, and you have to respond, and the simulation responds to you. And so we've gamified that learning experience. But that's only one small part of what's been a very carefully engineered 6-week experience that's intended to help people understand not only how to identify new technologies that might be useful in cybersecurity and what those technologies are and how to use them, but also how to move their organization to a better cyber posture.
Right. Now, in the interest of time, I think we should be wrapping up. There are a bunch of other questions as well. I would suggest people who have asked questions and we were not able to cover to sort of take them offline with any of the panelists. Yes, you can actually access the recording, of this session, because this is being aired live on YouTube, Twitter, as well as LinkedIn on Medici channels. So you can just go there and see the recording. And please send all the questions or any of the questions that you have to David, Johan, and Andy, offline as well. I do want to mention that we will also send you an email after this webinar where we will share a survey with you, which we are conducting again in the cybersecurity space. So it will be great to know the views and get your inputs on the survey. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I think this is one of the most interesting, video discussions, Q&A that I did, in a while. Thanks, Andy, Johan, and David for all your inputs. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I would just end it here. Thank you. Thanks a lot.